Is selling a rental property while there's still a tenant living there a brilliant strategy or a logistical nightmare, or maybe both? I'm Seattle Realtor Emily Cressey, and I'm an investment-friendly agent here in the greater Seattle area. And as a landlord myself, I know that deciding whether to sell your property with a tenant in place or asking them to leave first can be a tough call. If you want to maximize your profits, but you also want a smooth, hassle-free transaction, there's a lot to think about. So in this video, we're diving into the challenges of selling with a tenant in place, the pros and cons of keeping your tenant versus asking them to vacate, and how different property types like single family versus multifamily are affected. And we're also going to touch on Seattle's strict landlord-tenant laws and how those come into play. Okay, so let's get into it here. We're going to begin with the elephant in the room, which is that selling a property with a tenant is not always easy. Showings can be tricky. If your tenant does not want to cooperate, it can be difficult to schedule showings or keep the property in show-ready condition. Some tenants feel uncomfortable with strangers walking through their home, and legally in Seattle, they have rights to privacy and notice. If your tenant has a lease in place, the new buyer has to honor it until the lease ends, and that means they can't just kick them out because they bought the home unless you're able to negotiate an early termination with the tenant on their behalf, right? The landlord can always get them and they say yes, then they can leave. But because of Seattle's just cause eviction laws, you're prevented from just randomly asking them to leave unless specific conditions are met. And that means that there is some potential for tenant resistance, right? Some tenants might stop paying rent, they might delay showings, they might refuse to leave, they might damage the property if they're unhappy about the sale. And, I've heard horror stories about people pouring concrete down the drain and, just things like that, terrible things. So like it or not, Seattle is one of the most tenant-friendly places in the country. And if you're a seller, you need to be really careful. You can't just force the tenant out without proper notice. And in some cases, they might be entitled to relocation assistance. Okay, so always consult with their real estate attorney before making any moves and harassing your tenant in a way that might be illegal. Okay, so let's talk about the pros and cons of keeping the tenant. Pro, it can be very appealing to an investor who wants immediate rental income because there's already a tenant there. They have that income from day one. You and the buyer don't need to worry about having vacancy. However, having a tenant in there may limit your buyer pool, especially if an owner-occupant is trying to buy the property. So if you're selling a single-family house and you think you'll get the most by selling it to someone who wants to live there, it's probably a good idea to get them out. And even like I had a duplex sale a month ago that was the lady who wanted to buy it wanted to live in one unit and rent out the other, and we had to look for duplexes specifically that had a vacancy, because if both units are filled, it's very hard for the buyers to get those owner occupancy loans. They have to show that they're going to be able to move into the property within 60 days time. And another con is if the tenant is in there and they're not cooperating, can make it very difficult to show and sell the property. I have another guy who's looking for like a duplex in West Seattle right now. There's half a dozen properties on the market that he might be interested in, but he does not know what they look like inside because the tenant is in there and they say no showings until after you're under contract. And he's like, well, I don't know. I don't know that I want to put it under contract if I don't know what it's like inside there. So you're not really able to showcase the property with the tenant in there. And it's got to be a pretty hardcore investor that wants to make an offer sight unseen on the interior. One workaround is maybe having open houses where once a week or once every couple weeks, you let all of the interested buyers come in on a Saturday all at once. So you could maybe pay the tenant $50 to have them leave for a couple hours, and then you can get the buyers inside to actually see what the property is like. Okay, so now let's talk about having the tenant leave, right? Getting everybody out, vacating the property before you put it on the market. The pro of that is that it's easier to stage and show, and it increases the appeal to a lot more buyers. Owner-occupant buyers can get financing more easily, especially for FHA and VA loans. And unfortunately, you may lose rental income during the sale process, and you may have to put money into the property if the tenant left it kind of messy, but let's be honest, they often do. You might need to do the new paint and carpet after the tenant leaves to really make it look its best. And maybe you feel bad if grandma in there who's been a good tenant for 10 years, right? So another option, if you want them to leave before their lease is up, is to do a cash for keys arrangement or provide proper notice and get them to leave even if they don't want to, right? And so what the best option is depends on your property type, your buyer pool, and your goals as the seller. So let's break it down even more. If you have a single family home, typically these are sold most profitably to owner occupants who will want to live in the property. And so it's probably best to make it vacant so they can move in. You'll tend to get a higher sales price if you sell to an owner occupant because investors are looking to get a deal, right? Just like you, they want to make money, they want to buy low, they want to sell high. But an owner occupant wants a place that feels like home, and they kind of have different criteria besides the almighty dollar. You know, you got to get your tenant to move out, you got to clean up the place so then you can sell it for more. Okay, if it's a duplex, a fourplex, a multifamily type thing, then probably you're going to be selling it to an investor. So keeping a tenant in place can make more sense, especially if that person wants immediate rental income. However, if you do want to do like that house hack, owner occupant buyer, if you can get at least one unit to be vacant, that's good. And if your tenants are deadbeats, if they're mistreating the property, if they are going to make you look bad and be a rough start for that new buyer to work with, you might want to get them out in that case as well. You can choose your own tenants. The units have been remodeled is also a very compelling proposition for a buyer. So let's see, if you decide that having a vacant property is the best move, here's how to approach it ethically, legally, and strategically. Number one, check the lease. If they're on a month-to-month lease, you can provide proper notice. It's going to be probably at least 60 days here in Seattle and start getting them out. Okay. Number two, cash for keys, offer an incentive, big money for them to leave early and keep the home in great condition, and also maybe money to let people come in while in the process of moving out. If they're keeping it tidy and you want to show it while they're still living there, but they're on their way out, then you can do that and give them some money to, you know, spend the day somewhere else, right? And then the last choice would be a legal eviction in cases of lease violations, unpaid rent. You might need to go through the legal eviction process. I know a lot of people want to sell because their tenant is giving them terrible headaches, but obviously that's a problem for you. It's going to be a problem for the next guy that buys it. And if you tell him you're walking into a bad tenant situation, he's going to understand that that's going to be a risky and expensive process, and he's going to want to pay less for the home as a result. Under Seattle's landlord-tenant rules, you can't just tell a tenant to leave without proper cause. If you're selling it to a buyer who will own or occupy the home, you may have to offer relocation assistance if your tenant qualifies due to low income guidelines. So just look into that, okay? I always recommend working with a landlord-tenant attorney before making any moves on your tenant. And especially when there's this stuff where you have to give notice and then you're waiting 60 days. If you find out that you didn't properly serve notice, then that clock starts over and you've got to go through the whole thing in another 60 days. Time is money, and you want to make sure that you do things properly the first time. So if you want the most money from your sale, consider vacating the property and making light upgrades for better presentation. Market the property widely, and don't just list it as a rental sale. Attract all potential buyers. Okay, if you want the easiest sale, then sell it with a tenant in place to an investor. Be transparent with the buyers about the lease terms and the tenant reliability. Okay, so that's a wrap. Selling a rental with a tenant in Seattle isn't impossible, but it does take strategy and it can limit your options. So if you're thinking about selling a rental property, you're not sure about what approach is going to be best for you, feel free to give me a call and I'd be happy to talk you through it. You can call or text me anytime. And you can also visit my website, homeproassociates.com, or drop a comment below with your questions. In the meantime, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update on the Seattle real estate market and investing. I invest out of state too, so lots of fun to be had on the channel here. Thanks so much, and it's Emily Cressey. I'll see you on the next video.